Thank you.
I thank my colleague. Senator Hassan's next, and she has been very patient indeed.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair and Ranking Member Crapo, for holding this hearing. Thank you to all of the witnesses. We really appreciate your expertise and your being here. And Mr. Wessel, I have a number of questions for you. So let me start by asking you a question about supply chain resiliency. As you know, the pandemic has laid bare vulnerabilities in our supply chains and highlighted the importance of making strategically critical goods here at home. And I've also heard from Granite Staters, including Gray Chenoweth, who is the CEO of a company called Minim. These Granite Staters have been impacted by both new and long-standing supply chain issues. That's why I'm working on legislation to help us bring American manufacturing back in critical sectors such as semiconductors, biotechnology, and military technology. In addition to these efforts, Mr. Wessel, how can the U.S. ensure that the Indo-Pacific economic framework increases our supply chain resiliency?
As you just pointed out, and thank you for all your work on this issue, that in critical supply chain areas, we ensure first that we can make those products here in the U.S. where we can. Second, where we can't, we do so with allied countries that share our views and refuse to weaponize supply chains, as we've seen with China. I think that can be a component of the IPEF agreement. But investing in our own economy, making sure that we can meet our critical needs, and working with our allies to make sure that we share the burden of providing those products globally to democratic nations is key.
Thank you. This is also a question to you, Mr. Wessel. I'm working on a bipartisan basis to promote research and development investment in the United States, including through bipartisan tax legislation with Senator Young. According to a recent report by the U.S.-China Commission, between the years, if I've got the years right, 2001 and 2017, U.S. companies increased their R&D investments in China at a faster rate than their R&D investments in domestic operations in the United States. So how can the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework balance promoting domestic R&D and strengthening ties with our allies in the Indo-Pacific region?
Well, thank you for the question. And again, that goes back to your first point, which is first, we must make sure that we have the environment here in the U.S. to support R&D. It's not only work like you're doing on the tax code, but also the provisions that are in America Competes and USICA that will ensure that we have the R&D base here that we need to make sure that it is not under attack by countries like China that engage in massive espionage. There are also cooperative things we can do with our partners in the Indo-Pacific. India, for example, is a major producer of active pharmaceutical ingredients and utilizing them in formularies, et cetera. We need to make sure that there's a balanced R&D strategy, but first and foremost, do what we can to have the core, the basic, and the forward-looking R&D being done here.
Thank you. And I want to follow up on something you just referenced, which was how we go about protecting our intellectual property. In addition to increasing R&D, protecting that intellectual property produced by U.S. R&D is obviously vital for promoting domestic innovation. That's why, as a part of any new agreement, we have to address the vulnerability of U.S. businesses to IP theft posed by policies like data localization requirements that require U.S. companies to store data abroad. What are the vulnerabilities to IP theft that U.S. businesses face in the Indo-Pacific, and how could a new economic framework address these vulnerabilities?
Thank you. IP is the lifeblood for workers here in the U.S. Labor led on the patent reform legislation a number of years ago, because if U.S. producers of IP and innovation don't have confidence in their ability to get a proper rate of return, they're going to either do the R&D elsewhere, or they're going to license it to countries like China, who will then undermine our long-term industrial base. We need strong IP protections in any agreement. We need to make sure that there is no coercive measures, performance requirements, and other provisions that other nations in the IPEF can use to still coerce, force U.S. companies to share their IP unwillingly.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Mr. Chair. I yield back.
I thank my colleague. Let's see. Next would be Senator Young.
Thank you, Chairman. Ms. Shaw, thank you for sharing your important perspective at this critical hearing today.